Hello, good evening. Hello and welcome. Also on behalf of Anne, the director of Hebbel am Ufer, and in the name of the team of the How, to tonight's discussion on radical universalism, Israel, and the progressive forces. I am Margarita Zomu. I am the theory and discourse curator of the How, and I have the pleasure to shortly introduce to today's evening and our guests. Well, talking about Israel in Germany is a rather precarious and controversial endeavor. As you know, in this year, we observed this painfully in the case of exploding discussions around the invitation of Achille Mbembe to the Ruhr Triennale in Bochum. And today we find ourselves in a situation in which front lines are further hardened, in a situation in which spaces of discourse are narrowing down under the pressure of a rigid logic of dichotomies, and in an atmosphere of increasing mistrust, mutual distrust, and even enmity. Also critical thought, in the sense of argumentative deliberation on subjects like Israel, Palestine, anti-Semitism, and memory culture alike, seems to be more and more difficult, nearly impossible. So we understand this debate today as an effort to take the courage and intervene in this situation. And yes, try to do it maybe from a different angle. Namely, to take the also contested idea of universalism in terms of human and citizen rights as a possible point of departure of this discussion. Yes, we also do it because, of course, our guests today, in their thought, universalism is a leading principle. So, yes, we're also very grateful that Susan Neiman, that is also a speaker tonight, the director of the Einstein Forum, approached us to join forces and make this evening happen as a collaboration between How and the Einstein Forum. The initial occasion for this evening was the German translation of Omri Boehm's book, Eine, Utopie, published this year. The English title is A Future for Israel Beyond the Two-State Solution. A book that, for me, lays out revolutionary thought that subverts the unbending front lines, taboos, and imaginaries we are confronted with when talking about Israel. And I will shortly introduce Omri Boehm. He teaches philosophy at the New School of Social Research in New York. His work focuses on Descartes, Spinoza, and Kant. Previous publications include The Binding of Isaac, a religious model of disobedience, 2007, and Kant's critique of Spinoza, before the book Eine, Utopie. And I'm also very happy to welcome Eva Illouz. Eva Illouz, who is today nearly on stage, again on stage of the How One. Hello, Eva Illouz. She was supposed to come from Paris, but of course, due to the situation also in France, traveling became impossible. So we have her today with us in a video call. Eva Illouz, of course, also has been intervening on the subject of Israel for long now. For example, in her sociological essays that were published in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz from 2011 to 2014, and they were then translated and published by Surkamp in 2015 in a book called Israel. She is, as you might know, professor of sociology in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and director of studies at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. We know her, of course, from her vast writing on emotions under neoliberal conditions. And last but not least, I would like to introduce to you Susan Neiman, the director of the Einstein Forum and initiator of this evening. She was previously professor of philosophy at Yale and Tel Aviv University. She has a long list of German publications. I will mention Why Grow Up in 2015, and her last book from 2020, Learning from the Germans, a valuable contribution to memory culture, I think. So the evening will last for 90 minutes. This is the maximum of time we can be here before having to ventilate and regenerating air. And the time for questions is included in this 90 minutes. So we have to be strict about time. So with no further ado, I'm looking forward to an insightful debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margarita. Thank you, Annemie, back there, for collaborating on this evening. It did arise it arose in two contexts. First of all, I had been reading drafts of Omri's book and have been impressed with it for a long time, but it more perhaps immediately, it also arose in the context of debates within Germany in the last months about what it's possible to say in Germany about Israel. Debates that have caused increasing unease among Jews and Israelis more than anyone else. We've planned not to talk so much about that issue, but we can get to it at the end. We can also take questions on it. But what I thought would actually be really interesting and unusual in the context of the firing of Peter Schäfer or the disinviting of Achille Membe or any of the long list of events that have captured German public attention, I thought it would be nice for a Berlin audience just simply to hear 3 Jews and 3 Israelis. I actually took Israeli citizenship myself, although I only lived there for 5 years, just to have us talking normally, the way that we would talk among ourselves about questions of universalism, Israel, Palestine, possibly we'll get to anti-Semitism. We decided to start with a question. Eva Illouz suggested we ought to begin by defining universalism. And Eva, I'm going to let you begin with that.
Okay. First of all, there are many forms of universalism. You can think of monotheism as being the theology that believes that all human beings have a common ancestry. So it addresses the problem of filiation, saying that human beings have all the same father, if you want to use that image. And therefore, if they have the same father, they probably should follow the same moral laws. And that's why in the Bible, you have what's called the laws of Noah, which are the minimal laws that all human beings should follow. Then I would say probably Christianity furthered this by suggesting that all human beings will be saved. So Judaism remained somewhat tribal, thinking that only Jews would be saved, but Christianity, all human beings would be saved. So that means, I think that says something about the moral. I'm sorry, I have trouble talking because I hear my voice comes back at the middle. So the ideal of brotherhood suggests that human beings are all worth being saved, as simple as that. Then I would say there is the universalism of doctors. Doctors who cure rich and poor, black and white, Jews and non-Jews, and who are forced in a way to observe that the human body suffers in the same way. So that would be at one and the same time a kind of scientific universalism. We all share the same body, and universalism of suffering and compassion. We are all sick, we will all die, and that's a universal human condition. And then there is the modern moral universalism that we're all familiar with, and that was enshrined with the Declaration of Human Rights of the UN in 1948, which declared to all nations what the French Revolution. Are you there? Are you there?
We hear you.
Oh, you hear me? Oh, wonderful. Okay, because now I don't hear me any myself. It's no. Is it
They
possible
fixed something.
to? Okay, but I hear again myself. I mean, that is the issue. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was an extension of the 1776 American Constitution and the 1789 Declaration of Human Rights in France. But it was fundamental because it was not for one nation only, but it declared that that people were born free and that they were equal in dignity and rights, and that this was actually true for all nations and place of residence and gender and so on and so forth. So I guess the question you are asking has to do with the fact that what took, in fact, with hindsight, it took many centuries to do it, to be able to affirm. And what was thought by so many people as moral progress has become deeply challenged for the last 30, 40 years, I would say. And so much so that what was thought to be extraordinarily subversive and progressive is now thought to be it is now thought to be the manifestation of the most regressive tendencies in contemporary societies. So universalism in France, for example, has become almost a code word for right-wing Islamophobia. And how this concept, which was so powerful, which really laid the foundation of so much that is modern and that we value morally and normatively about modernity, how this concept could have arrived at this position is, I think, just a testimony to the state of intellectual and maybe moral chaos we are in. And just as a way to finish my answer, I would like simply to, read to you what Ho Chi Minh, who was a revolutionary in Vietnam, said in 1945. He said, "All human beings are born equal. Their creator has given them inviolable rights, the right to live, the right to be free, and the right to be happy." And he borrowed directly this declaration from the Declaration of Independence of the United States. So I'm sorry, I said before Constitution, I meant to say the Declaration of Independence. So to say that to be a post-colonial or anti-colonial goes through a denial of universalism is actually completely denied by history. And if you look at, again, Ho Chi Minh or what happened in India, Nehru, and even Gandhi, he was for a return to traditional Indian lifestyle, but he was also, he believed profoundly in the secular model and the Western model of citizenship in order to build India or rebuild India. So I think universalism retains very much its appeal and its profound moral power.
Thank you for bringing in Ho Chi Minh, Eva. Omri, how would you define universalism?
I'm not sure how I would define universalism, but I had a couple of ideas of how I was going to answer this question, and then when Eva spoke, I had new ideas of how I was going to answer that question. The two things that I will then begin by mentioning, one is Eva's mentioning of monotheism. So I'm just going to make, as we sometimes say in Hebrew, I'm going to just put it there. I'm going to say something about this. It's a remarkable fact that universalism begins with the prophets, the Hebrew prophets, because the first thing that Enlightenment did when it asserted universalism is to deny the possibility of prophecy. Prophecy is perhaps the most offensive thing that confronts universalism, and that's because a prophecy is the idea that some unique individuals can communicate truth that others can't. So it challenges a certain idea that everybody has the same authority and autonomy versus truth. I'm not going to say now much more about it because I need to figure out exactly what I think about this before I will say more. The second thing that I want to mention is Eva's mentioning of the, well, Ho Chi Minh, but the Declaration of Independence. I am not that old, but not that young anymore, and I can say that in the last 10 years that I've been teaching philosophy in the US, an amazing change of attitude has occurred, really amazing. When I started teaching Kant as a graduate student, really, at Yale, I began my Kant seminars by asking them, or not by asking students, but by just entering class and beginning right at the start, saying, we hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that und so weiter und so fort.
Which you should say every American child knows by heart. I mean, that's, if you know any piece of American literature, you know that.
Right, and then I would ask them, okay, how many people here believe in those self-evident truths? And everybody raised their hands, and that was a wonderful beginning for a Kant seminar, because I could start then challenging them by asking, okay, why do you believe this self-evident truth? Do you believe that God gave you those inalienable rights as the Declaration of Independence? Do you believe it's self-evidently true that God gave you these rights? Of course, basically nobody said yes to that. Then I asked, well, do you believe that nature is giving you natural rights? Do you believe that you received those rights in virtue of the station that you have as humans in nature? That would require a certain view of nature which is teleological and that contradicts science. Of course, no student accepted that. And it was a wonderful beginning of a Kant seminar, because I take it that's precisely the problem motivating Kant. How do we ground universalism as the absolute commitment to the full equality of human beings, where neither God nor nature can serve as this grounding? I now have a problem, a pedagogical problem in my classes, because I enter those classes and I still do the same. I say, okay, we hold this truth to be self-evident, und so weiter und so fort. How many people here believe in this? And nobody raises their hands. Literally nobody. So I ask, okay, do you believe in the equality of people, or that people ought to receive equal rights? Nobody, it's shocking, but nobody, at least at the New School for Social Research, granted this is a particular audience, nobody would raise their hands for that. Even my suspicion is if someone wants to raise their hands, they don't, because they're afraid what people will say about them, that they're reactionary liberals, not to say Zionists or something. Which brings me maybe to my, I don't know if definition, but take on universalism and its promise and its danger. Universalism, as I see it, is essentially about value. And that's, in a certain sense, obvious, but it has some non-obvious consequences. To say that universalism is about value is to say that it cannot imply that everything is of equal value, because where everything is of equal value, nothing has value. For that reason, universalism is necessarily an idea of exclusion. To say that everything, or sorry, that everybody, say, has value, or that everybody is equal, is to say that whoever falls within a certain category is more equal, is more valuable than whatever falls outside of it. Only under those constraints can universalism make sense. Of course, the category of equals can be the category of humans. For example, humans have more values than dogs. Humans have more values than stones. One reason why Spinoza is such an important thinker today is that he gives a metaphysics for denying this claim, for saying everything is of the same value, so nothing has normative value when considered under the perspective of truth or eternity. Which implies that universalism, as I understand it, is just humanism. That is a thesis that all human beings are equal and ought to receive equal rights. It's a good old Kantian thesis, for better or worse, that can be debated in the German feuilletons these days. But the fact that universalism is essentially connected to exclusion introduces, of course, further complications. Who gets to be within the group and who doesn't? Who gets to decide who gets to be in the group and who doesn't? And again, what is really the grounds of the claim that everybody is equal? Because I am, as a Kantian, am deeply bothered by the fact that it's not obvious at all. It's not obvious to me that God gave us our rights. It's not obvious to me that nature is giving us human rights. And the Kantian thesis, namely that reason, being rational beings, is what gives us fundamental value, absolute value, depends on complicated metaphysics that's not obviously defensible in modern terms. I think one reason why universalism has come under attack is that it's not obvious that we can ground it rationally anymore. And for that reason, it's been replaced by fake universalism, so basically identities of citizens, of white men, of Israeli Jews, of, well, gay people, women, African Americans. It's been replaced by many identities, nationalities, citizenship, and so forth, never the category of humanity, which is metaphysical, when metaphysics is what we deny. So that is how I understand what universalism is and its predicaments.
So I've been working on a really simple definition, and I realize it will sound kitschy to contemporary ears, but it would be that just simply the universalism is the claim that we, human beings, I mean, you're right that it's restricted to human beings, but I don't actually think that's a terribly interesting problem. Like, you know, and I'll tell you why in a second. We human beings, the things that we have in common are more important than the things that divide us. And Eva mentioned doctors and bodies, which plays into a metaphor that I've been playing with, because of course, yes, we all have bodies and our bodies are all vulnerable, and it is a claim of many post-structuralist writers that those who defend the Enlightenment or classical philosophy don't care enough about the embodied. And it seems to me the right metaphor would be to say that reason and particularly practical reason morality, is the bones. And the differences between cultures are the flesh. And it's a way of talking about, you know, one is perhaps not more important than the other. We certainly don't want to strip people down to the bones. But the bones also need, the flesh also needs a structure to hang on. I'm not sure how far I want to take this metaphor. It's something I've just been playing with for the last couple of weeks. But I think it brings us something. I want to say a word about fake universalism as well, because it is, as both Eva and Omri pointed out, it is quite shocking to see the intellectual reversals of, really, even Eva talked about 30 years, and yes, it's true, there's been something going on for 30 years, but the past 10 years have been quite intense. For me, anti-racism just is universalism. What it means to be universalist is that you're anti-racist, that you don't hold one group of people in higher value than the others. I think people have confused in the last 10 years universalism with globalism, with the idea that what unites human beings is not a set of rights and not a set of passions and not a set of needs. One set of needs, namely the need or the desire for the same commodities. And this is obviously, it's a neoliberal idea, the idea that what unites us post-1989 is that we all want an iPhone in our pockets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's one thing that I think has happened to the word universalism, and of course, it has been taken over by the wrong sort of people. What I wish people would remember, but then I guess this is one job of philosophy, is to remind people when philosophers of the Enlightenment, thinkers of the Enlightenment are attacked for being Eurocentric and for having claimed to be prophesying universal values when in fact all they were doing was propagating the interests of white European men. Eurocentrism is an idea that the Enlightenment came up with. The first people who said Europeans need to learn from other countries and other cultures and be corrected by other cultures were the philosophers of the Enlightenment, and they all took risks for it as well, which is really quite interesting.
It was Montaigne, by the way.
Pardon?
I think even before Susan, Montaigne already had conveyed that message.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's yeah, sure. I just don't know that anybody at the moment, but there may be a movement in France who's threatening to cancel Montaigne, as people are talking about canceling Kant. And are they talking about canceling Montaigne?
I don't keep up with all the people who are to be canceled. So probably, yeah.
Yeah. It's my very strong belief that since one thing that the Enlightenment did was to invent the idea of progress, not as something that was necessary, that's Hegel and Marx, but as something that was possible. And if we can think back to a world in which the very idea that human effort and human engagement could make anything better was not accessible, we could appreciate what we were given with the idea that, yeah, it's not necessary, and if human beings can make progress, they can also regress too, as we've seen many times. But I actually believe that Enlightenment thinkers like Kant, who's the one, of course, I know the best, who, yeah, wrote some pretty lousy things about Jews, women, and a couple of remarks about Africans, but at the same time wrote a ringing condemnation of colonialism and congratulated the Chinese and the Japanese for not allowing Europeans in to their harbors, that the same Kant would, looking back on us and say, you know, who can say nearly 300 years after his birth, you know, this is sexist, this is racist, this is anti-Semitic. I truly believe he would have said, yeah, okay, progress, you know?
So can I say something?
Yeah, please.
To what you just said, Susan, about the flesh and bones. I really liked your metaphor. I wanted to say, I think there is a practical intuition that is universalist when so much about most or perhaps all cultures and societies are anti-universalist and teach you that the stranger is not like you, teaches you that your culture or your ethnicity is actually superior, that your social class is superior, that your gender is superior and deserves to be served by another one. So I think most societies are actually, or groups and cultural groups are actually caught within this conflict and contradiction between a practical intuition that we are all alike and very powerful institutions and cultures that are anti-universalist in that sense. So what happened in the last 200 years is that a great deal of the world has become universalist, even in countries where democracies are still very imperfect. They speak the language. I mean, the grammar is there. The grammar of universalism is there. Even in Saudi Arabia, women understand what it means to be the equal of men. They don't have it, they're very far from it, but they understand it. So on the one hand, we have witnessed the extraordinary success of that idea, the idea of universalism. Not only, I mean, success on all levels, institutional and moral. And at the same time, perhaps because universalism has been so successful, it became contested. It became contested mostly, it was contested on the left and on the right. The right, the conservative rejection of universalism dates as far as Edmund Burke, or even before, but certainly Edmund Burke. And there is a very rich counter-Enlightenment literature that is profoundly skeptical about universalism. I think what has happened for the last 10 years, Susan, to go back to your own way of dating this stuff, is that a kind of objective alliance. I say objective in the sense that they don't know it, but this is what happened. An objective alliance has arisen between the postmodern left, the anti-colonial left, and those ultra-conservative voices, fragmenting tremendously the political bond, the political action, the social bond, and enabling, in fact, the rise of highly identitarian discourse like that of the populists, who are very much, most of them are based on this idea that the people have differences, that they have boundaries, that their integrity and purity should be preserved. Before the populists came on the scene, these ideas, maybe not in the same way and not necessarily for the same purposes, these ideas were also the ideas of men of the, what many call the identitarian left. And so you have this alliance between these groups, which allows societies to be tremendously fragmented in a way that we're not in the 1960s and 70s, and which prevents true collective action. and which prevents, and which actually helps, and which helps monsters like the GAFA, Google, Amazon, etc., to control increasingly our world.
I am also the timekeeper here, and I want to make sure that we get to talk about, in some detail, universalism in the context of Israel and Palestine. And Eva, I very much agree that there is something ununiversalistic or anti-universalistic, something tribalistic in every culture. What I find really quite striking is the fact that Jewish culture has both strains. And that may be where the idea of monotheism plays a role, or prophecy, I'm not sure. And it's not just that we have both strains in the Bible, which we have. In the text of the Haggadah, which is the text that Jews read at Passover, which is basically every Jew's favorite holiday. We read a long text and do various other things. It's very striking because there are passages that say, you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and therefore you have to welcome the stranger. And at the same time, after you get to the third glass of wine, it's, Amalek has always been there, a tribe that wants to wipe you out, and in every generation, another tribe that wants to wipe you out is going to arise. And it's impossible to say that one strain of this is more typically Jewish than another. They're both there. And it seems to me that we have both strains functioning in Israeli political discourse. It's just that one has become extremely weak. And I wonder if Omri could take this moment to talk a little bit about what a universalist vision for Israel and Palestine would be.
I mean, coming out from how you introduced this, I would say that as I see the main strand of Judaism is not universalistic, and at least the one that we know today. And perhaps, but this teaches us also something not just about Judaism, but also about universalism, because universalist that I am, I see the problems with it. Actually, the ways in which Judaism has been less, not more violent in history, has to do with the fact that it was less universalistic also, right? You don't need to go all the way down to Jan Assmann in order to say exactly when you don't, I mean, the Jews obviously introduced the Mosaic distinction as he would have it, but you don't need to go there in order to say when Jews did not assume that they have to have their religion all-encompassing. That's the reason why there was less violence, and they were less violent, not more. And that teaches us also something about universalism and the possible dangers with it, right? So universalist tendencies can lead to violence as opposed to checking it. The reason I mention this is that read into Israel, I'm not sure that this maps into this quite accurately. It seems to me that on whatever understanding of Jewish identity, a Jewish state cannot be a liberal democracy if liberal democracy is supposed to be a political structure that defends universalism. And I actually believe that liberal democracy is a political structure that better defend universalism. That's a controversial thesis, of course. And the reason has to do with the fact that Jewish identity is defined by Jewish ethnicity. And for that reason, a Jewish state just cannot be a liberal democracy that has room for the complete equality of all human beings. For that reason, I don't believe that any form of a Jewish state can be the right structure to defend universalism. That's a controversial thesis. A lot of liberal Zionist philosophers deny this, of course, from Michael Walzer to Moshe Halbertal and Avishai Margalit. Yeah, well, Zionism, maybe one way to put it is Zionism is identity politics. I like saying this to my students at the new school because I like saying this to everybody because it tends to offend almost everybody. Usually people who support identity politics hate to hear that because they do not tend to like Zionism. The Zionists see Barry Weiss just now in Die Welt and Tablet magazine in the US. As a Zionist, speaks against identity politics, but really the argument of Zionism is possibly the beginning of the identity politics argument. It is precisely the argument. Liberal universalism has failed us. It did not defend our lives. It did not defend our rights. We need to do our own politics. And if you deny our right to do that, if you criticize us from a universalist perspective, you're anti-Semitic, because what you need to do is to check your privilege. You need to understand that you cannot share our experience as first generation, second generation, third generation Holocaust survivors who, given this particular experience, also have a particular and a particularistic anti-universal politics. That I take to be the argument, really one of the main arguments for Zionism, not to be confused with Judaism, not the same. This is why maybe the questions don't map onto each other. Judaism is complex in all sorts of ways and has room for many different strands in it. Of course, Zionism too, but on my view, no form of Zionism, if that politics is one that supports the Jewish state, can be universalistic. Of course, some forms of Judaism may well be universalistic. Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in this universalistic prophetic tradition. And there is a long history to that strain of Judaism. But of course, I entirely agree with you that it has taken a back seat to a very tribal vision in the last even, 50 years. But look, Omri, for people who haven't read it, would you sketch really briefly what your vision for a liberal, democratic, universalist, but non-Jewish state would be?
I can try. You will stop me if I go over time. The basic idea is what I basically stated just now. It is the idea that a Jewish state cannot be a liberal democracy. It cannot be a liberal democracy because liberal democracies may sometimes violate neutrality on the level of, say, culture, but they may not violate neutrality on the level of ethnicity and blood. The German state can be German and include Jews, Christians, Muslims as German Jews, German Muslims, and so forth. The Jewish state is a state that asserts the sovereignty of the Jewish people, not of its citizens, cannot have non-Jews as equal citizens. That's basically as simple as that. That's the reason why Israel, unlike liberal nation states, is not a liberal nation state. That's the level in which it just right off the bat contradicts liberalism and universalism. The argument to sustain that would have been the identity politics argument, namely the Holocaust. We need that in order to defend our lives and rights. By the way, an identity politics argument that's strong if there ever was any. That's why I'm not such an anti-Zionist. Not at all. Just as I'm not an anti-identity politics, I think those trends need to be criticized in the good Kantian sense of the term. They need to be criticized in order to be maintained and improved so that they don't become tyrannical in their anti-universalism. That's the beginning of the book, basically, and the claim is that when that contradiction was, so to speak, contained, I'm not a fan of anti-colonialist language or post-colonialist language, but this notion of containing this contradiction is colonialist because containing the contradiction was good for Jews. It was not so good for Arab Israelis and definitely not to Palestinians. But it was contained for some time. It explodes in our face with the demise of the two-state solution. Nobody can pretend that it's being contained. The Jewish democratic contradiction explodes. By the way, I think we ain't seen nothing yet. It's just beginning now. I think we're going to see worse and worse things. And for that reason, since there is not going to be a two-state solution, I think that we ought to start thinking of an alternative politics. Now, when we do that, we face what Kantians would call an antinomy. That is an apparent contradiction. Something that seems like a contradiction and is almost a contradiction, but doesn't have to be. And the apparent contradiction, or the antinomy, is between the fact that the Jews are a nation, the Jews are a people. I think that denying this is anti-Semitic, actually. And because the Jews are a people, they have a legitimate claim for national rights. Problem with it? This claim for national rights inherently seems to violate the idea of liberal democracy on the most basic level. Definitely if we think of those national rights as being established in Israel or in Palestine, then that contradicts the rights of the Palestinians. And it does contradict the rights of the Palestinians. So the question is, what do you do with that? Basically, the argument of my book is that this is an antinomy and not a contradiction, because we can give up on the notion that national rights have to be established through sovereign states. So insisting on the subtle, often forgotten, now often revived also distinction between sovereignty, national sovereignty, and national self-determination shows us that the Jews do have national rights, and they can sustain those national rights in a sub-sovereign constellation within a binational state with the Palestinians, so that the Palestinians and the Jews both exercise their national sovereignty, their national self-determination, but they are sovereign people, they are sovereign citizens in one state. The idea of the book, I'll say just this, Susan, very briefly, the idea of the book is how to relate to this thinking about consciousness, that is memory and identity, to try to show that this is fully consistent with the origins of Zionism and with Zionist ambitions, initial Zionist ambitions. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, that it's also consistent with, call it post-Holocaust, post-67, post-state politics. That is a Begin plan, which many Israelis, many people forget, offered citizenship to all Palestinians. So to show that that idea, we can walk with it, we can begin to revive it.
I want to get into the memory questions in a little bit, but first I want to ask Eva to respond to Omri, and specifically, perhaps to begin with the question, do you agree that the two-state solution is dead? Is there any way to revive it?
I'm not going to answer that question. Do you hear me? I'm sorry, I don't hear you.
We hear you well.
Okay. I don't like to take the position of a pundit who is going to predict the future. I don't think it will be revived. History have ways to prove lots of prophets wrong, so I prefer not to make any predictions, although it doesn't look like it's going to be revived. I just wanted to say two things about about universality that relates back to your discussion with Omri. I agree with Omri. I don't think the universalist trend is very strong in Judaism, certainly not in contemporary Judaism. And I think the reason why it was very strong for 150 years, roughly during the Enlightenment and the Socialist Revolution, is because, to put it in very crude terms, but Jews had an immense interest in believing in universalism. They were a minority, they were a very oppressed class, and universalism was their way out. It was their way to equality. So, so the greatest universalists were Jews, of course, but who wouldn't be? Because living in Europe or Eastern Europe, it was really a whole program of emancipation. I don't think that Israel, the original Israel, was that foreign to that universalist sensibility. I think many of the founding fathers, if you want to call it that way, and I think Omri would agree with me, not all of them, but many of them had a universalist, both a particularist and universalist imagination. The Arabs of Israel were extended citizenship quite quickly and in a way that was, you know, remarkably mature. I mean, politically mature. The problem, and this is something that Omri did not mention, and which for me has an overwhelming importance, maybe because I'm French, is the issue of secularity. The state is not secular. It's not that it's not only Jewish. It's much more deep. It's much deeper and much more serious than that. It is the fact that the ethnic hierarchy actually is supported by a very powerful system which discriminates, which favors the religious version of Judaism. And not only the religious version of Judaism, but the religiously orthodox version of Judaism. So I would be slightly different. My position would be slightly different from that of Omri. Because, first of all, because I'm Zionist. I confess that I'm Zionist. I'm even very Zionist in the sense that I totally believe in historically, I mean, at the historical point when the Jews created their state, it was the morally justifiable thing. I think the Jews needed to be somewhere. That it happened the way it happened is tragic, but they had to be somewhere. So I am a Zionist. I'm not sure the problem comes from the Jewishness or only from the Jewishness as such, because there are so many Jews, there are so many ways, very flexible ways of defining membership to Judaism. The problem is that in 1947, Ben-Gurion signed a treaty with the ultra-Orthodox, what would become the ultra-Orthodox party, Agudat Israel, enshrining that everything that belongs, in fact, to the public sphere would be religiously Orthodox. And since then, so you have not been able to create, the state has not been able to create spaces of neutrality. So Omri mentioned the word neutral before. Yes, he's absolutely right. Liberalism and liberal democracy is based on the possibility of creating at least the fiction of neutrality. I want to say at least the fiction. But for this fiction to be convincing, you need to have a state that is secular, that is where the separation between state and religion is good and a functioning one. This has not happened in not only it has not happened in Israel, but the grip of religion over the state apparatus has only grown with time.
I want to let Omri respond to that, but I want to make two slight caveats. Eva, I know there's an argument that Jews were universalist because it was in their self-interest in Europe to be universalist. 30%, Jews in the United States, 30% of the white people involved in the civil rights movement, seriously involved in the civil rights movement, were Jewish, and they represent, 2% of the population. So that universalist streak was very strong, even when it wasn't a matter of self-interest. I agree with both of you. I agree with both of you that it's not in evidence at the moment, but it has a long tradition that I think is not just connected with self-interest. But what I want to make sure we do, I thought it would be radical in Berlin just to listen to three Jews talking about Israel and universality, but I want to make sure that everybody has enough background information. When I asked about the two-state solution, I wasn't asking you to be a prophet, but I suspect that an awful lot of people, since commitment to the two-state solution is the liberal ideology of basically anyone outside Israel looking in. I think Omri, among other people, have argued it's just a lie. It is physically impossible for there to be a two-state solution at this point in time. And I'm not sure that enough people know that. It's, so do you want to
I think many things. I want to slightly disagree with both of you, actually, but that's a good thing. First, I do think that the two-state solution is dead. And my impression is that people begin to recognize this, and that's a good thing. I think that the lie about the two-state solution, it was not just the lie that whether it's dead or not. It was also, and slowly we must begin to recognize this, it was a lie that it was ever going to succeed or that it was ever going to save liberal democracy in Israel. Many people who supported the two-state solution supported it because they thought, let's be honest about it, because they thought that would be the way to have not too many non-Jews in Israel. And once this dream collapsed, then the good liberal Zionists started having to confront their contradiction. Because it does reveal the fact that from the get-go, liberal Zionism is a contradiction. So I'm not a priori against the two-state solution because I believe that in the end politics is about also compromise, and the two-state solution could have been a good way, for example, to achieve a beginning of better lives to the Palestinians and self-rule to the Palestinians. I think that for many very pragmatic, practical, political reasons, the two-state solution perhaps could have been desirable. I think that there's a weighty argument right there to saying that it didn't succeed for many reasons. It didn't succeed because of both sides. However, that the inherent contradictions of liberal Zionism already prevented it from succeeding. Namely that in a state where the Jewish people asserts its sovereignty, the Jews are not going to give the rights to the Palestinians. This notion of us giving the Palestinians the rights, right, is a contradiction of liberalism right there. In a liberal democracy, the people gives rights to themselves. The only question is who belongs to the people. And in a Jewish state, the Jews belong to the people. The Jews would not give the rights to the Palestinians, or also not to Arab Israelis. And this is my slight disagreement with Eva there, I think. By the way, I also view myself as a Zionist, but as a Zionist of a particular type, not a Zionist who believes deeply, not believes at all, frankly, in the notion of a Jewish state, but someone who insists, and that's a contradiction to that antinomy that I spoke about, that insists that you can pursue Zionist motivations without a Jewish state, and that this is what we need to pursue today. My view, and I think you identified precisely how I would view your position, Eva. It is a very French position, and I see it as different from you're as an Israeli as anybody, as my, Israeli, not French position. It is I do not think that the problem of Israel is a problem of secularism. Zionism was a secularist movement from the start. Of course, that was lost. But I don't think that it would have been any more liberal or democratic on the level of citizenship, even if Jabotinsky's son, famously fighting fights in the Knesset, in parliament, that pork will be served in the cafeteria of the Knesset because this is a secular state. Ought not to be Jewish in the religious sense, but in the cultural sense. The Zionist, the famous Zionist argument, Judaism is not just a religion, it's also a culture, and for that reason, a Jewish state that asserts a cultural identity of the Jews, not the religious one, is fully compatible with liberalism, seems to me false, because even if religion is completely put aside, in fact, especially when religion is completely put aside, what remains of the identity of Jews is fundamentally their ethnicity, their blood. My German grandmother, as I like to say, has very little culture. You know, she was definitely not a religious person. She was a good yeke. She had very little cultural commonalities with my Iranian grandfather. They had one thing in common, and that's the fact that they had, so to speak, Jewish blood. And that's in the end what the Jewish state defends, and that's the problem with the concept of citizenship there. I don't think that if we solve the hegemony of the Orthodox Jews over the definition who's Jewish and who's not, we will have solved much, because some people who are not Jewish, you know, this will be helpful to say some Russian Jews, as we call them in Israel, whose Jewishness is in question. Sure, we'll be able to maybe, they will be able to become Jews more easily with the method of Reform Judaism and not the Orthodox Jews. The non-Jews will still be second-class citizens. Sorry?
Could I just say something about that?
Please do.
About our disagreement, the blood, this idea, the blood, is entirely based in religion. That's what makes Judaism quite different from Islam and from Christianity. In the 12th century, there were, the boundaries of Jewish identity, religious Jewish identity, closed up, and they became much more based on blood. And I know only of two groups where blood plays such a significant role. It's aristocrats and Jews. Because of course blood is a metaphor, and it's a way of closing up the. So the ways in which Jews separate themselves from non-Jews, which is responsible for for an exclusionary politics that has no equivalent in the liberal democracies, and I completely agree with you there, is profoundly rooted in religion. And to say that practices that are enforced everywhere, from public transportation to what you eat in the cafeteria, to what you learn in school, to how you acquire citizenship and how you define citizenship, to say that these practices have no impact on the self-conception of yourself as a people and in relationship to other people, for me is not positive. I think it has a profound impact, and not only on culture, on the self-conception, but also on institutions and on the legal institution, and on how institutions treat different social groups. And if you look at the evolution of Israel, it has gone towards an increasing closing up of the group, which has gone actually along with the increase of strength of religious parties.
Eva, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure, absolutely.
I don't disagree. I agree that the fact that Judaism so fundamentally depends on blood, metaphorically, has everything to do with its religious origins. The reason why I was so we agree about that. What I wanted to say very clearly, because it is a common argument to say, look, the problem with this Jewish state is that Ben-Gurion cut a deal with Aguda. He had a deal with the ultra-Orthodox. They have the authority basically on deciding who's Jewish and who's not. The Jewish state could have been different. It could have treated non-Jews differently and so forth. The only thing that I want to deny is that that's true. I think that, sure, the fact that Judaism depends on blood has everything to do with religion. I want to insist that even if we overcame, for whatever reason, the ultra-Orthodox Jews now will stop having power in Israel. This will not make a difference on the level of the concept of citizenship, which is anti-universalistic. That's the only thing that I want to insist about.
I want to make sure that we have time to take some questions, but there is one subject that I'd still like for us to discuss a little bit. Omri, I think perhaps the most surprising part of your book, well, there are various things that are surprising, but you build on, in one chapter, a well-known to Israelis essay of Yehuda Elkanah, who was a philosophy professor, permanent fellow of the Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin, but also someone who survived Auschwitz as a child, and wrote in the late 80s that the memory of the Holocaust was becoming poisonous in Israeli identity, and it needed to stop. We needed to forget. And Omri builds on that argument quite a lot. At the same time, you argue that it was both incredibly important in two moments when Arab-Israeli politicians stood up and publicly mourned the Holocaust on Holocaust Remembrance Day. And you conclude the book by saying it's important for Arabs to remember the Holocaust, and it's important for Israelis to remember the Nakba. That is the expulsion and murder of thousands of Israeli Arabs in 1948. I think it's an incredible thesis, which seems right to me. It also leads me to wonder, because as you know, I've been thinking a lot about national memory and how to deal with it for the last 4 or 5 years. Of course, we don't want the Germans to forget about the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, we've talked about it, respect the ways in which the Germans have slowly, fitfully, with difficulty, with reluctance, all of that, it's very clear, but have in fact done something historically unique, which is not only to commemorate their own suffering, but also to acknowledge that they were responsible for the suffering of other people. So it seems clearly important that perpetrators not forget what they've done. That's a piece of moral responsibility and universality. But it may be the case that when the victims of an atrocity remember the atrocity too much or too often, it does in fact become quite destructive. I wonder if you could say something about that, both the particular case and perhaps the general one as well.
I don't know if I mean, as you speak, the most immediate thing that jumps to my mind in answering this is something maybe I should not be saying on stage in Germany. In a way, I'm not opposed to the Germans forgetting the Holocaust. And I can say this so colloquially because my notion of forgetting has to do with remembering. This clear-cut separation between remembering and forgetting is precisely what, I don't think that I invent the theoretical background to understand it. I try to walk there with Ernst Renan and more thinkers in the background. But I think that moving forward in politics requires always forgetting, but we can forget only things that we remember. So the notion of forgetting that I speak about regarding Israel, namely forgetting the Holocaust, forgetting the Nakba, is basically remembering the Holocaust and remembering the Nakba. And I think the same would apply in different ways, to be sure, also to Germans. The Germans must remember the Holocaust, they must remember to forget it. They must remember it in order to move on from it. If the Holocaust will just define German consciousness and German thinking, it will be not a good thing. It will, for example, speaking about Israel, that's basically the same point. I take off from Yehuda Elkanah, as you mentioned. Yehuda Elkanah published in '88, 3 months after the beginning of the first Intifada, and that's extremely important. He published an op-ed. I counted 800 words in Haaretz, extremely irresponsible for a philosopher. He said, in praise of forgetfulness, Israelis should forget the Holocaust. Extremely strong language, saying there is no greater threat to the existence of Israel than the memory of the Holocaust. Full stop. And he is speaking about this as forgetting. I didn't research this extremely carefully, but I did research this. To the best of my knowledge, he did not return to this text to further specify what, he's a very competent philosopher, what he means by forgetting. Of course, forgetting is not just erasing from memory, or is it? Because people actually interpret him in this way, in many circles. I take it what I tried to do in this essay, in the first chapter of the book, is to return to Elkanah and speak in more sophisticated terms about what it means then to forget the Holocaust. And I think I agree it's necessary. However, it means that the Holocaust has to be remembered, but certain practices of remembering it to exclude need to be forgotten. That's the idea, that's the basic idea. As I appeal to Ernst Renan, as one of the most classic formulations of modern liberalism is the idea that citizenship depends on not just what people remember together, but what people forget together. And I try to show that Jews and Palestinians can remember to forget together in Israel. And I try to show, for example, that if you against the backdrop of Israel's political memory, when you see Arab Israeli leaders, commemorating the Holocaust in a certain way, for example, the way Ahmad Tibi commemorates the Holocaust from the podium of the Knesset, they insert themselves as citizens whose duty it is to remember the Holocaust together with Jews, and they assert thereby their right to participate in what seems to be Jewish identity politics, namely the right of Jews to have their own commemoration of the Holocaust. I think that's extremely welcome. That's not easy. That's, cannot be easy. But I think that's extremely welcome as a gesture. And what I try to do is to show that, A, this is possible in relation to the Holocaust, that Jews and Arabs will remember it together in Israel, and second, that we need to start develop the same practices for the Nakba. Today is a wonderful day to speak about this because Israel now, I'm sure Eva is aware of this, Israel now is arguing fiercely about the question of a law to commemorate the Kfar Qasim massacre. People from Meretz and from the Joint List were trying to pass a law of commemorating the Kfar Qasim massacre. I'm thinking along similar lines, but I frankly think this is it's exactly not enough. The Kfar Qasim massacre was a massacre conducted in the 50s of one village. Meretz, now seeking the collaboration of Arab Israeli parties, is trying to show them, we actually are thinking of you as citizens, so we will try to introduce a law that would commemorate this massacre together with you. What they don't do, by the way, of course they failed, the law did not pass, so Israel would not commemorate it. The one thing that Meretz did not do and would not do, and true collaboration of Arab and Jews in Israel would require it, is that a party like Meretz jumping in and saying, we need to have what I like to call the Nakba Law. In Israel, the Nakba Law is famous as the law that says that you cannot commemorate the Nakba, there has to be the Nakba Law, that the Nakba has to be commemorated. It has to be studied in schools. It has to be researched and so forth as a duty of citizens.
Okay,
When Meretz will do that, we will be speaking of collaboration.
Okay, I've got to play policeman here and remind everybody that we are legally obliged to get out of here quite soon. So, 10. I thought we didn't start until quarter after.
We started later.
Yeah, so without 15, that's what I thought. That's okay, sorry. I wanted to leave a bit more time. We could go on, the three of us all night. There is a revolving microphone that you don't have to put close to your mouth. Does anybody hear? 2 microphones. Do I see any hands? Anybody who would like to ask anything at all? The lights are very bright, so it's a bit hard to see, but... Yes, sir, here. Oh. Yes.
It needs to be the microphone for the live stream.
Yeah, please come down. Or if you want to tell me the question, I'll repeat it into... The question is, if the two-state solution is no longer possible, but as Omri has described, it seems not yet possible even to commemorate one massacre, how realistic is the proposal to establish a one-state solution under the aegis of universalism?
I think it's a far-fetched reality, but it's the most realistic politics we can actually pursue. It surprises many people that I think so. But I think that when people call this one-state politics not realistic, they overlook something. By the way, when I say I think it's the most realistic politics, it does not mean that to follow Eva on this, that I'm speaking as a prophet. I'm saying what's the most realistic politics that we need to pursue. If you're asking me if I were a prophet, if I would bet or prophesize that we're going to have this politics, that's not going to be the answer that I'm going to give you. But as an actual, viable, realistic politics, I would insist that if what I call the Haifa Republic, the one-state federation is the most realistic politics for the following reason. Going on defending the two-state solution is a form of ignoring reality, and it's a form of ignoring reality because just like, as I say, that denying global warming is a form of ignoring reality. It's ignoring the facts. There's not going to be a two-state solution. Now the question is, are those people who still promote the two-state solutions are people who promote realistic politics? And I don't think so at all. For many years they have been insisting on a lie in order to avoid realism. The other alternative, which I think is very broad these days, is to just think in resignation. To just try to avoid politics or thinking about the future, how we can promote a better future. That's also a form of avoiding reality. Resignation is avoiding reality. The other form is a form of doing what Israelis call containing the conflict. Containing the conflict is also a form of avoiding reality, if only, and that may not be the only reason, if only because the conflict will not be in the long run contained. In the territories controlled by Israel right now, there is a Palestinian majority. Apartheid, and this is what it will be, this is what it is in some regions, you know, we can debate the word apartheid It will take more than 15 minutes, but the situation in which the Jewish state controls a majority of Palestinians, to think that it can go on for the next foreseeable future is also a form of avoiding reality. The question is, what is the most realistic thing that we can do? And I think that beginning, step by step, speaking about a different political program that would promote equal citizenship, will recognize the national rights of both peoples, that will show that they can both recognize and respect each other's memories, and in fact can and must do it in a way together. Far-fetched, but the most realistic thing we can do. I like quoting Herzl, wenn ihr wollt, ist es kein Märchen. But people don't understand why I like quoting that.
You better explain in what context Herzl says that. Not everybody here will know that.
Well, Herzl, announcing Zionism, he imagined the Jewish state, and people thought that this was a utopia. And he said, well, if you will it is not a dream. I like quoting this, but not just as an ornament, and people, I think, overlook there something that's extremely important. We need to understand something about the concept of reality that's being assumed by people like Herzl and Ben-Gurion when they are the most successful. They look at the world, they see that there are no good options, no easy options, and they understand that they have no option but to dream bold dreams and to make them into reality. They understand that, sometimes the alternative to having your mind in the clouds is burying your head in the sand. And the real realism isn't to have your mind in the cloud and say, then this is what we must do. We might fail, but we must begin to promote it. That's what I'm proposing. I think there's a good chance that we will fail. But I don't think there's anything more realistic to do. We can refrain from doing anything. That's yet another form of not being realistic.
Eva, do you want to comment on that?
No, I mean, except that I would agree, but this would be the only way out. I, like him, I don't believe, but we are many not to believe anymore that the two-state solution is viable. Like him, I believe that Israel can either become an apartheid state or adopt the universalist constitutions of other countries, but I don't think it will happen. I don't think so. I mean, unless there is some kind of very strong pressure from outside of Israel, which I do not see right now. On the contrary, Israel has only strengthened, I think, its position in the world and is much less likely to be pressurable by outside forces, at least for the moment. So I think we are on our way to enshrine further what already exists, which is to say an apartheid state, a state in which there are de facto two laws for different people, two territorial spaces, different sets of roads. We are already there, and I cannot see from where the change will actually come. At least not in the immediate future.
There are other questions. Someone, I really can't see. Please.
Because the obvious question which has to be posed is like, have you been discussing this on how did the discussion went with Palestinian colleagues? I was thinking about something years ago, Nusebi said from Al-Quds University, what do I want of a state? I want my personal security and I want my liberty, and if I have this, I don't care what the name of my country is. So, yeah. Reaction
he suggested
what? And sorry, because and I mean, I was thinking so much when you said ethnicity. It's not really a question in my mind, but I still don't know what a Jewish ethnicity is supposed to be. And I was thinking of your neighboring country. Of course, Lebanon is not a model country right now, but when you think of the idea, the original idea of Lebanon, I find it somehow very much like some sort of Israel as a model Israel, where different ethnicities with different cultures somehow come together and form this country. But that's just a random idea. No question coming from there.
I mean, Sarin Useiba, I think he used to call it Palace El or something like that. I think my name is much better as the Haifa Republic. Think about it. I think Sarin Useiba is a wonderful example of a Palestinian colleague. I don't know him personally. I wish I did. Maybe Eva does. Is a wonderful example of a Palestinian with whom to think these thoughts with. Yes, he promoted a one-state solution along those lines. I'm not sure about the next generation of Palestinian leadership. I will say this about Israeli-Arab leadership. I don't know them well enough, and I don't know them almost at all. But I have a sense that the joint list in Israel de facto now serves as a bridge for a different type of politics. Whether this bridge will be used or not, I don't know. Maybe it depends on us. But it makes possible new forms of politics because the Israeli left has collapsed. I don't know if you've noticed. Right now in Israel's parliament, there is no representation at all to the good old liberal Zionism. If the European Union, Frau Merkel, I don't know, J Street, if they're looking to representation in Israel's parliament, they actually have nobody, but perhaps a joint list, right? Basically nobody.
The joint list is a group of Arab parties.
Right. More or less, yes. And with this trend, more and more Jews start voting for the joint list. The question is, what type of role the joint list will begin fulfilling in the near future? Are they going to remain the joint list mostly, not officially, but basically of Arab Israelis? Or are they, or some of them, going to start adopting a politics of joint action together with Jews on the premise of actual joint equal citizenship? Because we have to admit, right now in Israel, there is no equal citizenship for Arabs and Jews. And there is a great difficulty for Jewish leaders to join such a coalition on the premise of full equality. That's at least the way I see that. But I think that precisely because of the demise of the two-state solution and the related disappearance really, of liberal Zionism, such coalitions are becoming necessary and possible.
I'm going to ask, because we really do have to leave in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask quick answers, request quick answers from both of you following up on this last question, because one of the things that I experienced when I lived in Israel that really underscored Eva's claim, and many people have claimed it, but you're not supposed to, you can get disinvited if you're the wrong person and claim it here. It is an apartheid society. And one measure of this was how very, very little social interaction there is between Israelis and Palestinians, except I gather in Haifa. But even there, it's when I asked people when I first moved there about how that went, I was told, alas, the one time that we meet our Palestinian colleagues is when German foundations pay for us to have discussion groups at the Van Leer Institute. And I don't think that's an exaggeration, because in the 5 years that I was there, I had exactly one Palestinian student in a class, and I was never in a situation where there were, you know, there was kind of, so quick question to each of you. Based on whatever your experience might be, and I'm guessing that it's not all that robust, how would, after Nusebi's generation, how do you think contemporary Palestinians would respond to this kind of proposal? Eva, do you have a quick response to that?
To the universalist proposal?
Well, something like Omri's proposal of a universalist, secular, binational state.
So I think young Palestinians, I mean, there are data. I'm not making up anything here. Young Palestinians are very tired of the structure. And they basically want to have basic rights. So in a way, you can view it as a defeat, as them having been defeated by the situation. But my understanding is that what they precisely want is now, this is the front that they are fighting. It is exactly this front. They understand that they have a better chance fighting for a universalist for universalist polity and for rights, for healthcare, than they have for something much bigger. So they have moved to micropolitics, and I think they could do very well with that. Susan, I have to apologize, but I'm already late. I thought it would be over by 9:30. So I'm going to goodbye. Yeah.
Talk to you
I'm
soon.
sorry, just go ahead.
No, talk to you soon. We need to leave as well. So Omri, do you have a very short answer to the same question?
I cannot say what the next generation of Palestinians want, but I just don't know. I also don't know this about Israelis or Jews. But I can say what my impression is, and I can say what I think they should want. I don't shy away from that. I would be happy to be contradicted by anybody. It is my impression from hearing some sounds that there is a talk about transitioning from speaking about national rights to speaking about civil rights, to a next generation that will not speak the language of national liberation, but of civil liberation. Of course, that's, say, the supporters of Hamas do not think along those lines, obviously. I don't think they are the majority in any way. That's an impression. I think if I were to make a recommendation to a Palestinian compatriot, I think this is the challenge of thinking of the Palestinians as my compatriots and of the crimes that Israel does to them as crimes against our compatriots. I would recommend to them to follow this line and to follow it together with the Jews who would do it together with them.
Alavai, as my grandmother would have said. Here's to that. Thanks to both of you. Thanks to everyone for coming. And thank you to the How for hosting this.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Susan.